probably all saw the announcement with the bio, so I'll try to make it short. Bob is at the Medical Research Council, which is something in England, which is something equivalent to the National Institutes of Health that we have here. He's at Cambridge, and he's a fellow of the Clare Hall College at Cambridge University also. And Bob's specialty is psychoacoustics, among other things. And he will be, well, he had his PhD in this area at Cambridge University, and he's very well endowed with all kinds of honorary titles. Thank you. As you can tell, I am, so he's a fellow of the Acoustical Society and other fellowships. I'm really lucky, I consider myself in life, to have met him. 20 years ago, we'd grown up together, although he's a lot younger than me. Bob is a remarkable scientist, and I hope you'll get a sense of that today in some of the few things that you will be discussing. He's one of those people who have a knack for asking questions, the right questions, those simple questions that get to the heart of the issue. So no matter what I ever, over these decades, I came to him with a complicated problem, one that is full of really screwy details and all that, he always makes you feel like an idiot. Because he comes up with that one question, did you think of that test or something? I said, well, why didn't I think of that? But Bob makes you feel really wanting to see him all the time. I always look forward to my meetings and conferences because Bob's going to be there. We're going to have a great time talking and arguing and getting these sort of feelings once in a while. And because of that, I tried to invite him a million times to every meeting I ever organized or had a say in who's going to be invited. I've invited him to the mountains in Colorado in the summer, to the mountains in the winter for skiing, to the beach, to the desert. He always managed to find a good reason why he's not coming. So when I approached him this time to mention about this lecture, I was completely prepared for it. I said, oh, don't worry about it. And he totally blew me off by saying, sure. And I tried very hard to figure out what it is that brought me. And I decided it is the Distinguished Lecture Series. It's that distinguished product. He is really distinguished. He is, we are blessed in the auditory world to have a colleague like this. So please welcome Bob. Speech, which I normally has to die in order to I'm particularly honoured to be here, not least because some of the best hearing research in the world takes place in this university, and even more of it takes place not very far away. So from over the British Airways, thank you very much for taking the trouble to invite somebody from so far away. So what I'm going to be talking about is the problem of listening at a cocktail party in electric and acoustic hearing. So what is a cocktail party? Oh, the cocktail party problem. For those of you here who are students, it isn't the problem of what to do after too many margaritas. It's a situation where you have lots of people talking at once, and you're trying to focus in on one person in this complicated background to try and figure out what it is they're saying. What I'm going to do is I'm going to describe two ways in which normally hearing people are able to do this task. Those two ways are differences in the onset between sounds, onset time between sounds, and differences between the pitch of competing speakers. And I'm going to concentrate quite a lot on the pitch cue. Basically because there's a clinical population, we find this particular cue quite difficult to process. What I'm also going to do is to describe some seemingly obvious ways, that is, if you were to look at a speech spectrogram, you might think these are very obvious ways in which people might be able to separate sounds. I find that actually, surprisingly, the auditory system is unable to do so. For the second part of my talk, I'm going to talk about this clinical population. So these are deaf patients implanted with a device called a cochlear implant, which bypasses the damaged receptor cells in the ear and directly stimulates the auditory nerve electrically. And we find patients who, at least in quiet, are able to understand speech well, even on the telephone in the absence of audio-visual cues, but who in noisy situations have problems, and who have problems in using this speech cue which I described just now. What I'm going to do is to then compare the ways in which pitch is processed in electric hearing, that's the cochlear implant, and in normal acoustic hearing. And towards the end of the talk, I'm going to just consider what the implications are of this comparison of these differences, the ways in which we might improve sound segregation or improve cochlear parties for cochlear implants. So here's what we describe as the cocktail party problem. I was very struck by the fact that I was being invited to talk near the nation's capital on election day. And I thought I'd play you a little clip which I recorded just from my DVD player at home, which illustrates how in England, quite often people have quite noisy situations to deal with, but nevertheless are able to hear hear one voice of competing speech. So what we're going to do is play a situation where the listening task starts off quite easy, where the background is quite quiet, where it gets progressively noisier, but where you'll find, where the person on the clip finds, you can see, it's still possible quite easily to pick out the part of speech from the inferior background.
And I do not want to either dismay our allies or hearten our enemies by suggesting we will do anything else other than stay until the job is done. And I believe it has been a strength that there's been a bipartisan policy on this, and I hope that is maintained.
My party supports what the troops are doing in Iraq. Yes! We have never backed some premature timetable for withdrawal, but we want the Prime Minister to give frank and candid answers about the situation in Iraq. The problem is, we've got a situation where the picture on the ground is...
Okay, and then, a bit later on in the same debate, now, the contrast is rather polite when I said it, so he seems to take it in turns to speak. They see it as, at least in principle, a challenging situation, even though, even in this room, in the remote environment of the House of Commons, sound segregation is possible. So here's Tony. What's the problem facing him? Well, one problem is that the total level of the competing sound is often greater than that of the person he's trying to listen to. So he's trying to extract a target at low signal noise ratios. Another problem is that the physical characteristics of competing sound, one person's voice, is really in principle pretty much the same as another. It's not detecting a tone in a broadband noise or something like that. The bandwidth and the temporal dynamics of the spectrum content of different people's voices are quite similar to each other. And what's more, the spectrum of different people's voices is changing over time. So it's not like there's some simple static noise which is easy to cancel. And yeah, I realise I'm talking in an engineering department here, I'm not an engineer myself, but you can probably imagine what challenges this would face if you were trying to develop some automatic sound segregation algorithm for this task. And such algorithms perform considerably worse than normal hearing listeners. To make matters worse, of course, there's sound echoing around the chamber, bouncing off the walls, off the ceiling, and making life difficult. Despite all these challenges, normal hearing listeners succeed remarkably well at this task. Even with money, so not up on 10 viewers here. You don't have to take my word for that. If you listen to the radio, or English radio, where people are often talking at the same time, you're listening to a mono radio, people can still perform sound segregation. Yeah?
Well, some of us who have trouble hearing watch the list.
That's
true. See who the normal hearing is like that.
That's true, but even actually normal hearing listeners take advantage of lip reading or listening to speech both in quiet and in noisy backgrounds. Although, I guess we're less dependent on it. The contrast which I mentioned was that people who have less thinking were fitted with cochlear implants, although they may be able to understand speech in quiet, have quite great difficulty in this situation. So what we're going to consider is how it is that normally hearing listeners perform this challenging signal processing task, why it is that cochlear implant listeners can't do it, and what it is we might be able to use to help. So for the next half hour or so, I'm going to really focus on how we do the first question, which is how normally hearing listeners do it. But we'll try and bear in mind some of the issues which this might raise for implant listeners, which I'll discuss in the second part. Well, one pretty obvious physical cue, which it turns out you do use, are differences in onset time. So if I close my lips in the middle of the word about, then all of the frequency components of my voice start and stop together at the same time, and will do so differently from those of another person's voice. Normally hearing listeners use this cue quite firmly to segregate sounds. So what I'm showing you here is a frequency spectrogram. Let me get my arrow back here. So frequency on the vertical axis, time along the horizontal axis. On a simple chord, and what we hear is a single sound. Decreasing intensity. If, however, we do this, which is to turn on the different frequency components or harmonics at different times, then it's possible to hear out these individual components as pure tones. And notice you can do that even when there are other components present at the same time. I stole this from Chris Carlyon, or mentor of mine. So what I'm going to do when I discuss the second group, which is to do with pitch perception, is to talk mostly about vowels, because these are the voiced portions of speech, those portions of speech which have the strongest pitch. So here's the waveform of the vowel. It repeats at a rate produced by your vocal fold vibration, and this rate corresponds to the pitch of the vowel. What I'd like to do is to draw a distinction between these fast fluctuations here in the waveform of the vowel and the slower overall modulation, because known as the envelope. And this distinction will come into play a bit later on when I start talking about cochlear implantations. We can also describe this vowel in terms of its frequency spectrum. So before I showed frequency on the vertical axis and time along the horizontal axis, I kind of flip this around a bit now, so I'm just showing amplitude versus frequency. This vowel has got a pitch of 100 Hz. So these individual lines in the spectrum are harmonics. They're all, the space in between these lines is determined by the pitch or the fundamental frequency. I'll sometimes call that F0, which in this case is 100 Hz. And these larger peaks are the formats produced by resonances in your vocal tract, which determine what the vowel is. So what I'm going to now talk about are pitch cues in normal hearing. As I said, the spectrum of the periodic sounds, such as the vowel, consists of a series of harmonics whose frequencies are multiples of a common frequency called the fundamental frequency, or F0. Listeners use this regularity to derive the pitch of the sound, but they can also use it to sort through the composite spectrum of two competing sounds. So what I've shown you here are two vowels which I've superimposed upon each other. Now, these vowels, the way I've drawn them, have a different pitch. If they have the same pitch, then what you hear is a sort of single, undifferentiated sound. Here's the two vowels now shown in black and red. That's the sort of single, undifferentiated sound if I play them on the same pitch. If I now play them on different pitches, you can hear two sound sources in that. Yeah? Do you want to wind up a bit? Evidence for the ability of normally hearing listeners to use this cue comes from a number of sources. Here's an experiment by Brungard et al. What they had is two speakers saying some quite stylized sentences, which are often performed, ready, tiger, go to green 3 now, or ready, barrow, go to red 6 now. And what subjects had to do, and there were two people speaking at the same time, what they had to do was to pick out the speaker whose call sign, i.e. the second word in their sentence, was barrow, and then report what the colour and number was, which went with that sentence. And they had three conditions. In this, so either the competing target was the same talker as the target, the competing talker was the same, a different speaker but had the same sex, and therefore quite similar pitch. or at a different set, different pitch. So if we listen to this case where the different pitch of the competing speakers are of different genders, it's relatively easy to hear them apart.
Ready, Baron, bring something now.
So if you listen to the voice which says Baron, you should be able to follow that.
Ready, Baron, bring something now.
Whereas if you go to this case where it's the same speaker, but the voices have very similar pitches,
Ready, Charlie, bring something now.
the task is quite hard. So what we're showing here is percent correct performance as a function of the signal-to-noise ratio. What you can see is that performance is better when there's a pitch difference between the speakers. And also that even at these, in this case here, even at these relatively negative signal-to-noise ratios, subjects are doing pretty well. So in this kind of pitch situation, there are actually at least two ways in which people can use pitch differences. One of them is a bit like that example I showed you with the vowels, where you have a snapshot of the frequency spectrum over time, and they use the differences in pitch to sort through the spectrum and decide which components belong to which voice. But even if, imagine a situation where people were extremely considerate and they took it in turns to say each word in a sentence. That's actually a panel game on BBC Radio in which they do this. Even then, where only one person is ever talking at the same time, you need to be able to find out which word belongs later on in the sentence to the same speaker. So you need to be able to, if you like, pick out the pitch of a single sound and then track that over time. So what I'm going to do now is just give you a little basic introduction to processing and pitch in the normal audio system. I'm going to start off with this relatively simple situation where there's only one voice present at a time. And I'm going to start with a particularly simple stimulus, which is the pure play. So here's sort of hearing 101. In your inner ear, there's a membrane from the basal membrane, which is thin and stiff at one end and wide and wobbly at the other. The thin and stiff bit are exposed to high frequency sounds, and the wide wobbly bit are exposed to low frequency sounds. And there's an array of auditory nerve fibers along the length of this basal membrane, which conveys this information to the brain. A simple way of modeling this stimulation is by a bank of overlapping bandpass filters, in which one filter output, one filter corresponds to one center frequency or one place on the basal membrane. So here's the 300 Hz pure tone, here's the time wave going on at the top, and here's the output of a bank of filters corresponding to different places on the basal membrane, the low frequencies at the bottom and high frequencies at the top. If I increase the frequency of this pure tone way 100 Hz, you can see actually that two things happen. One of them is not surprisingly, instead of most of the activity being on filters tuned to 300 Hz, it's in filters tuned to 800 Hz. But also, if you look at the fine time waveform, you can see that the repetition rate of the filter output is faster in the 800 Hz case than in the 300 Hz case. So there are actually two possible cues to the pitch of the sound. First of all, which auditory nerve fibers are firing, in other words, those innervating these low frequency filters or these high frequency filters. And also the timing pattern of those auditory nerve fiber responses. And this timing pattern is often referred to as phase locking. So I'll sometimes flip between using the word phase locking and timing cue to refer to this. So if you're a psychoacoustician, then you spend about 50 years arguing with other psychoacousticians about which of these two codes is the most important for pitch. Well, about halfway through this process. Because both this place of excitation code and this phase locking or timing code vary in frequency. But it's the truth universally acknowledged, almost universally acknowledged, that the timing cue is very important for pitch perception. I'm not going to say it's the only thing, I'll come back to that later, but I think it is very important. One piece of information for that is if you go up to very high frequency pure tones, above about 4 kilohertz, the auditory nerve fiber ceases to phase lock, to show this temporal pattern to the tones, and around about the same frequency, pitches become much less discriminable, so this frequency difference even increase, and subjects can't identify a musical interval. They can't say whether two notes are an octave apart or a musical fifth apart. Another problem is that, although I've described this in terms of a linear filter bank, in fact the system is quite non-linear, and as you increase the level of the sound, different places on the basal membrane show the maximum vibration, so different nerve fibers will show the maximum firing. Despite this quite marked change in the place of excitation load or level, pitch of sound is more or less constant over quite a large range. It changes a bit, not very much. So now let's go one on to something a little bit more interesting, although not much more interesting, which is our complex sound. So as I said, I've flipped this around now, looking at this amplitudinal power versus frequency spectrum here. And as I said, sound can be viewed as being passed through a bank of bandpass filters. Now it turns out that these filters are broader at higher frequencies in response to the higher harmonics than they are to the lower harmonics. It's like the tuning of the basal membrane is broader in this high frequency region than in this low frequency region. So what that means is that these low frequency harmonics, their spacing is wider than that of these narrow filters down at these low frequency regions. And so the outputs of these filters, or the outputs of this particular part of the basal membrane, responds to this little guy down here, as if it was just a pure tone. These higher harmonics, in contrast, interact with the broader filters. The temporal response to these filters will reflect the interaction of these different frequency components. So I can show that here. Here's the waveform of our vowel. It's got a pitch at 100 Hz, so it repeats every 10 milliseconds. And we can see here the response of the higher frequency harmonic, higher filters to the unresolved higher level harmonics, and to these lower level harmonics. So in this region, the basal membrane repeats, or the output of the filters repeats at a rate equal to the fundamental frequency. It follows the timing of the waveform. So it gives us a nice straightforward way to estimate the pitch. Now here, though, and I'll zoom in on some of these filter outputs in a minute, like we're doing now. What we can see is that these different filters, none of them are repeating at the same rate as the waveform input waveform. This one chooses 200 Hz is responding as if to a 200 Hz pure tone, 300 Hz is to a 300 Hz pure tone, 400 Hz, etc. So it turns out that the brain can figure out, by looking at these different temporal patterns, that there must be an underlying periodicity of 100 Hz. So there's a sort of simple way here, and a complicated way down here, and the brain uses the complicated way. We can demonstrate this with a simple experiment performed by Fock back in 1967. So what he did was take a harmonic complex tone, and then shifted the lower resolved harmonics down in pitch, and the higher unresolved harmonics up in pitch. And what he asked subjects to do was to say, what happens to the strongest pitch which you hear in the second? Did it go down with resolved harmonics, or up with unresolved harmonics? Here's the test for you. Who heard it go down? Who heard it go up? Good. Well, 100%. Okay. So I've argued then that this phase locking, that these resolved harmonics are really important for pitch, and that this phase locking key is also important. But although this phase locking of this kind of key may be really important, it may not be sufficient. And this issue of sufficiency will come particularly into play when I start talking about copyright. So it's possible to produce low frequency phase locking in order to know in fibers which innervate regions of the cochlea which are normally tuned to low frequencies. So here's a pure tone. It's got a rich pitch, although it will come out of this speaker system very well. 100 Hz, here's its waveform, here's its frequency spectrum. Here's I'm going to play you two notes, 100 Hz coming a little bit higher. I did that yesterday, I don't know why that came out quieter with the speaker system. One thing which we've done is to take acoustic pulse trains, such as this, which also repeat 100 Hz, and filter them into a very high frequency region of the cochlea. So what we can then do now is as we can increase the pulse rate here, producing a change in the phase locking pattern of these auditory nerve fibers tuned to this very high frequency region. But they're still filtered into this very high frequency region and not down here. And when you do that, you find that you get a rather weaker pitch, which is less discriminable than you would keep the case with the pure tones. Here's another type of stimulus in which something similar has happened. You can also see there's a repetition rate at 100 Hz, but it's actually got a very high frequency spectrum. And you get this kind of slightly weak, kind of tinny sort of pitch, which is not very easily discriminable. So one possible reason for this is that it might be important for the temporal pattern in the auditory nerve fiber array to occur in fibers which are tuned to which are innervating the appropriate part of the basal membrane, i.e. innervating those parts of the basal membrane which are normally tuned to that repetition rate. Another possible explanation for this relatively poor performance in these conditions where we put low frequency phase up into high-frequency regions comes from an experiment by Kim et al. And in fact, one of the first people to elaborate this paper was actually Xiao Zhang, the first. So what they did was they recorded the responses of lots of different auditory nerve fibers on different parts of the basal membrane array, or the auditory nerve fiber array, in response to stimuli consisting of two pure tones. And we can actually just think of each pure tone separately because they're separated by quite a lot of frequency axes. What they found was something I alluded to earlier, which is that those fibers, which fibers was firing at the highest firing rate in response to the tones, vary quite a lot from the overall level, and actually in this case slightly a haphazard way. But there was a very consistent cue which was present in this pattern of firing rate. What I'm plotting here is the phase of the auditory nerve fiber response as a function of the place in the basal membrane at which the auditory nerve fiber is innervated. What this finding shows is if we take this response to one of the pure tones, shown up here, is that over this range of auditory nerve fibers here, this range of places here, the fibers are firing more or less at the same time. At this point down here, over this region, we can see that there's an increasing timing delay between the responses of fibers innervating adjacent parts of this array. Now what's compelling about this is what this looks like here. You can see there's lots of curves here. But in fact, there's about 7 or 8 curves. And these are actually in response to tones of different levels, ranging from 4 decibels to 74 decibels. That's quite a large proportion of the dynamic range of hearing. But what we have here is a cue to the frequency of the tone, which is independent of the overall level, unlike the firing rate. So, a lot of people, including Xi, have proposed differently complex ways in which this information could be decoded. She said I always ask simple questions, but because I can't think of any complicated questions. And I can think of a simple scheme because I can't think of any complicated schemes, which is that if you have some sort of higher order neurons, which are the input to the nerve fiber array, where each neuron subtracted the response of each nerve fiber from its neighbour. Then at this point here, where all the nerve fibers are firing at the same time, the output of that subtraction will be 0. And where they're firing at different times, you get a non-zero output. Now what's interesting is that these sharp phase transitions will not be produced by these filtered bandpass pulse trains and these other stimuli which I described, which don't produce a very strong. So far what I've been doing is talking about the pitch of a single sound at a time. As I pointed out, if you have a vowel sound such as this, where the two vowels have got different pitches, then listeners can separate out these two competing sound sources. This, however, turns out only to be the case when these lower than the resolved harmonics are present in the mixture. It's possible that what the brain does is sort through different sets of nerve fibers and assigns their outputs to different vowels. But suppose we now look at a case where we've only got these unresolved harmonics, and now what we're going to do is just imagine you're looking at the output of one frequency channel, one set of fibers. Here's a pulse train with a particular rate, here's one with a slightly higher rate. And here are these two guys superimposed upon each other. Now, you wouldn't really have to be a signal processing genius, which is just as well because I'm not, to say that in principle, the brain ought to be able to, or could, in theory, sort through this mixture of two sounds to determine what the two underlying periodicities are. And without using any place excitation cues, for example, if you did an autocorrelation on this waveform, you could get two peaks corresponding to the two underlying periodicities. The model such a However, an experiment I performed back in 1996 showed that people are actually completely unable to use this cue. So what I did was I presented subjects with mixtures of these two sounds, under cases where they're either the resolved lower note harmonics present, or where the higher note unresolved. What I'm going to do is to play some demonstrations. They're all going to start off with a background noise, which I put in just to mask some of the distortion that it's generated by the in-ear. You'll hear a low note, a high note, and then a mixture. So here's a case where the resolved harmonics, the lower and the resolved harmonics are present. Okay. So can you hear those two notes in the mixture? Here's what happens when I filter the stimuli into a high frequency region, so that no resolved harmonics are present. So that mixture just sounded like a horrible crackle, and I spent about half a day with my spectrum analyzer and my oscilloscope checking that I've done something I hadn't done anything really crazy in the stimulus. But it turns out that this particular cue is not one case that people can use. So to summarize pitch processing in normal hearing, what we can say is that the pitch of complex sound is dominated by these low numbered resolved harmonics. Phase locking with the temporal and pattern response is important for encoding the frequencies of these harmonics, but it may also be important that either this frequency and phase locking occurs in the right nerve fibers, or alternatively, there's a phase transition in the response phase nerve fibers around, in this case, the peak. Is the pitch of complex sounds well defined?
Peaks.
The peak.
The peaks.
The pitch. Yeah, yeah. What do you mean by well, in the sense? Sorry? What I mean is that subjects can match different complex sounds having different frequency spectra or onset times or other characteristics to have the same pitch, and that when they do so, they typically match to the same fundamental frequency. I mean that musically trained subjects presented with two complex tones can tell whether they have a musical interval, such as a fifth or an octave. But I don't know really how else.
Because in everything you saw so far, there is a very clear dominance in harmonics. There is only complex sounds where mixed, and I do not find harmonics.
That's true, because the individual harmonics are important to the pitch. But for example, so for example, one thing you can do is you can take a complex sound in which you take harmonics, they're currently the exact numbers, so harmonics 1, 2, 4, 7, and 9, and another complex sound in which you have harmonics 3, 5, 8, 10, 11, and 12, and ask subjects to adjust the pitch of those two sounds so that they're equal. And subjects can do that very accurately, even though they have no individual harmonics in common. The subjects are abstracting something other than frequency of the individual harmonics. So here's another cue for sound segregation, which I think up until the early 1990s was commonly believed to be a common sense cue for sound separation. And it's a cue known as common fate. If you think about a visual example, if I take my fingers such as this, then apart from the fact that you don't have any fingers I have on each hand, these might look like a single object. But if I move them in opposite directions from each other, then you get some sort of perceptual separation. Similarly, when I change the pitch of my voice, then all the harmonics of my voice move together in the same direction and at the same rate, by the same proportion of their same frequency. And it's been suggested that this common fate cue might be used to group together the components of common components of one source, and to separate them out from common components, components of other sources which might be moving together. Here's a demonstration from the famous book by one of the deans of sound segregation called Bregman. Consists of two sets of harmonics. I think this is the fundamental frequency, and these are harmonics 3, 4, and 5. I'm not really sure. And the frequency modulated these components either all together, either at a fast rate or at a slow rate, or he modulated the lower group at the fast rate and the upper group at the slow rate. So here's when they're all modulated together. You hear a single sound. If you do this more slowly, you hear another single sound. And now if you do what's shown in this slide here, and play the mixture, then you can separate out the two sources. versus the CD. So this looks like a clear piece of evidence for the use of cognitive hearing as an issue. But there is something of a glaring error, or logical error in this demonstration, and in fact, in pretty much all of the demonstrations of the use of cognitive up until that point. And this is, if I take a group of harmonics and I modulate them coherently, so I move them all together, then they remain harmonic. If I take one here, it's explicitly tuned to harmonicity and to deviations from harmonicity. And if I take one component and modulate it in opposite directions from then it stops being harmonic. So in that last demonstration, this lower harmonic, which was moving up and down at a different rate to the rest, wasn't only doing that, but it was becoming distuned. So 15 years ago, which makes me feel rather old, I did an experiment where I asked subjects to discriminate between sounds in which, in this case, there are two component complex, and both components are moving together or in opposite directions. So here's this three-interval task. Three sounds, this one here, this one here, and this one here. In this one, components are moving together in frequency, as in the last one, in this case, the second sound, and the components are moving opposite. And I had three conditions. Either these frequencies were either harmonically related, either by the second and third harmonics of 200 hertz, 400 or 400 and 800, which is an optimal relationship, or defined by a much weaker harmonic relation. This ratio is 7 over 4. This case here consists of an extreme incoherence, a difference between frequency modulation plays in priori gains. We use smaller versions of differences. Here's a recent replication of that finding. Here's the sensitivity index U prime, so 0 is chance and 4 is extremely good. And here's the phase shift which we apply. What I'd really like you to point out to is that, is that in this inner harmonic case, i.e. when the components are inner harmonic already, then subjects are completely unable to tell the difference between components which move up and down together and those which are moving in opposite directions. It's only when it introduces this harmonicity in zone cases, so subjects can perform the task. So there have been a number of experiments investigating this since then, and this general finding is generalized for sounds with more frequency components, which show differences in frequency modulation rate rather than just phase of modulation components. A recent finding in a paper by Leisinger and Moore showed that if you go into very, very slow modulation rates, maybe 2 hertz, then subjects can actually perform this simple discrimination task, but they still don't use that cue to perceptually separate out different components of different sounds. So in other words, it's now pretty much agreed that this frequency modulation coherence tool, this common thing, is not used by the auditory system. Well, why is that? Well, in vision, when I move different components across the sensory array, when I move them in the opposite directions, then as I move, I'm moving different elements across the sensory array. But in hearing, if you take the case of a voice, when I change the frequency spectrum of my voice, then that frequency spectrum is determined not only by the source of those vibrations, i.e. my vocal fold, but also by the filter produced by my vocal tract. So here's a frequency spectrum of the diphthong N, and what we can see is simply that we've got bits of the spectrum moving in opposite directions, even though it's a single sound. So it wouldn't really make sense for the auditory system, unless we're doing something very smart, to separate sound based on this difference in trajectory. Okay, so now on to cochlear implants. As I said at the beginning of my talk, cochlear implants are still occurring to more than 100,000 people worldwide by direct electrical stimulation of the auditory nerve. Many implant listeners do extremely well in quiet, but even the best performing listeners have difficulty in noisy background. So they don't really like cocktail parties. I've already shown that normal hearing listeners use pitch differences between sounds and onset differences to perception separated. So what I'm going to do is to compare the processing of these different types of cues in normal hearing and by cochlear implants. And we're going to say look at what implications these differences have for pitch perception and sound segregation. So I've already shown you that normally hearing listeners use pitch differences to separate different voices. Here's a graph from the paper by Stickney et al., in which subjects had to identify a male talker, which is quite hard to recognise sentences, in the presence of either a male or a female answer. At this 0 dB single noise ratio, you can see that these subjects are doing extremely well, but also they do better when there's a sex difference between the master and the target. They do better than the females. If you look at cochlear implant listeners, same single noise ratio performance is a chance. And even if we boost the signal by 20 dB decibels, we find first of all they're not doing as well as the normally hearing listeners, but also the sex difference is not. And just to remind you, I said there's actually two ways in which the normally hearing listeners might be able to exploit these pitch differences. One of them is separating out the simultaneous positions of the sound, and the other is to pick out the voice at any one time, with a single sound measurement, and use that to track pitch over time. So we're going to talk a little bit about these two possible ways in which implant listeners might theoretically be able to perform this. So here's the hardware of a cochlear implant. Sounds picked up by a microphone or behind the ear and sent to a speech processor, which determines which pattern of electrical stimulation is going to be sent to which electrodes in the ear. Normally this is part of the same device as the microphone nowadays. This is a slightly old-fashioned device and it illustrates how this is second. This information is then sent across the skin by radio frequency to a receiver transmitter, which then sends the appropriate pattern of electrical stimulation to different electrodes inserted in different parts of the cochlear. So here's the electrode array of another device going around the spiral-shaped cochlea, around where the basal membrane is. This particular device has got 22 electrodes on a silicon carrier. You can see here's the machine array. Now, although there are 22 electrodes here, what's important to bear in mind is that cochlear is filled with fluid, and so current is going to spread along the cochlear. It's not just going to be restricted to one region. What I'm going to do now is just show you a little bit about what the speech processing is. So here's the strategy called continuous interleaved sampling, which is used in pretty much all of the talks in one form or another. Sounds picked up by this BBC 1940s radio microphone and sent through a bank-to-bandpass filters. This is the syllable SAR. If you look at the output of one filter, which is tuned to low frequencies, it filters out the frequency of the syllable. The envelope, the slowly varying fluctuation, is extracted from each channel. And this envelope is then used to multiply a band of very fast electrical pulses, which is then sent to one electrode in the cochlea. And this is a low frequency channel, so it goes to the bit of the cochlea which will normally respond to low frequencies. Here's 3 other channels. There's usually many more channels than this. If you look at the high frequency channel, this picks up the S. The same process occurs, and this gets sent to a bit of the buzzer membrane which will normally respond to high frequency. One thing to point out is that the width of these analysis channels is much wider than the space between the individual harmonics and the complex sound. So these resolved harmonics, which I say are really important for perception in normal hearing, don't really make it through unscathed, even this initial stage of processing. Now, quite a useful tool is to simulate, if you want to get a feel for what happens in cochlear implant, or if you want to do cochlear implant experiments without going to the trouble of testing cochlear implant listeners. What we can do is to perform all of these stages of processing. What we can do is perform all these individual types of processing, but instead of multiplying them with a train of electrical pulses, we can multiply bands of noise, which are filtered so that in a normal ear they will produce similarly different bits of the basal membrane. Here's how methods go. And here's how methods go through cochlear implant. So this illustrates a couple of things. One of them is that if you know what she's saying, it's pretty easy to hear the words in that simulation. Well, the other thing is you're not going to buy a record. The pitch information is just highly degraded. So here's the output of a real cochlear implant. Here's 8 channels. Here's the input waveform of a vowel. Repeats every 10 milliseconds. This is going to change 100 Hz. Here are our different channels. What we can see is that pitch is encoded by modulations in this pulse rate. As a rate equal to the fundamental frequency, you can see, for example, this channel here, these modulations are following the waveform of the vowel, the repetition rate of the vowel. Pretty much in the same way as the unresolved harmonics in normal hearing, actually. But these modulations are very deep. Actually, they don't occur at the same time in all the channels. So if you take this channel here, for example, it's got a peak right about here, which corresponds to not quite the peak of this other channel. Perhaps not surprisingly, when implant listeners listen to music through their implants, pitch perception is pretty poor. There's a few exceptions, but it's pretty much. You can improve these faults slightly by making these modulations deeper or aligning them across the time. But what's worth remembering is that in this speech processing scheme, it's only these slowly varying modulations at the envelope of the vowel which are preserved. And these faster fluctuations are lost. The reason that's important is that cochlear implant companies and some research groups have been trying to think about ways in which they could include this fast varying time information in the pattern of stimulation on each channel. So this is kind of the big thing in cochlear implant research now. You will start talking about including these so-called fine structure cues in an attempt to improve pitch perception and sound segregation. But I think it's probably worth stating what I think might be obvious, which is that attempts to do that are really going to never work. If you do so in such a way that the auditory system can decode this information, this fundamental information. Well, better temporal pitch processing is possible in cochlear implants. If we bypass the speech processor and just present a simple pulse rate to one channel of the implant, that is, then if we increase the pulse rate, then the patient spontaneously say that the pitch increases, at least up to rates of about 300 Hz. And within this range, they do a bit better, well, rather better than their implant speech processor, but not as good as the experience. But there's a kind of, not so much a flying element, there's a gorilla element, which is that once this pulse rate gets faster than about 300 Hz, performance just gets lots worse and deteriorates afterwards. So here's the result of an experiment where subjects were presented with 2 pulse strings. The lower one, the lowest pitch one can have a range of either 100, 200, 300, 400, or 500 Hz. And the higher one was a rate 35% higher. What we can see is that at these low rates, for most of the listeners, performance is extremely good. But as we get above about 200 Hz, things go through the floor. There's one patient here who does his own thing, which, for those of you who've done cochlear implant research, is reassuring because it shows this is a real cochlear implant experiment. Because there's always one person who just doesn't do textbooks. So why is it that we can't get pitch down the auditory nerve, or at least down the auditory nerve and into the brain, in a way which can be encoded at these relatively high rates? So in terms of hypotheses, there's really only kind of one thing on the block. And that's something derived from an auditory nerve recording technique called the electrically evoked combined action approach, or ECAP. So what you can do is you can stimulate the auditory nerve using one electrode and record the response of the nerve using a neighboring electrode. So here's a replication of a paper by Wilson et al. What we find is that these fast rates, this is 1,000 pulses per second, you get a big response to the first ones, little ones per second, big to the third, big to the fourth, big to the fifth, etc. And this was attributed to all neurons being in a resting state for the first pulse, and then being refractory to the second, i.e. no longer able to fire, recovered by the third, and so on. And this could clearly confuse the auditory system, because you may be getting intervals corresponding to twice the pulse rate being conveyed down the auditory nerve to the brain. So, one approach to see if we can overcome this has been put forward by a chap called Jerry Rubinstein, who's one of these rare creatures. He's a surgeon, ENT surgeon, who's also got degrees in electrical engineering. So, designing new speech processing strategies and then implant patients, make it simple experiments, do what he likes. Whereas if I do that, then they just laugh at me. So here's a sort of schematic of what he does. Here's our sort of simple electric pulse train. This isn't quite what he does. What he does is he puts, but essentially what he's doing is putting low rate, really fast pulses in the background here. So the reason he does that is he thinks this will sort of reintroduce some of the spontaneous auditory nerve firing, which normally occurs. But essentially what he's hoping people do is it will put different nerve fibers in different refractory states when these big pulses come along, and therefore get rid of this alternation. And indeed, when you do recordings in cats, then it shows that this works. And it also actually surprisingly reduces the detection potential for nerve stimuli. But the million dollar question is, does it improve rate distribution? So what we did was essentially a similar experiment to the one we did before, I'll just whiz through this, I think, but put in different background pulse trains at different overall levels. And essentially, the performance shown on these dark symbols is without the desynchronizing pulse train, and these other ones are cases with the big pulse trains at different rates. But the bottom line is, it doesn't really get out of that. What we're trying to do to follow this up even further is actually to measure the auditory nerve response and behavioural performance in the same subjects to the same stimuli to see if we can really nail this. The results are a bit early, but there are certainly cases where it looks like there's information there in the auditory nerve, but the patients are somehow not being able to decode that information. It's not being presented in ways in the form which you can use. So, to summarise pitch coding in normal hearing compared to cochlear implant listeners, in normal hearing, pitch is dominated by these low-numbered resolved harmonics. These are encoded separately by different subsets of nerve fibers. And it may be important that there's either a phase-to-brain match or this phase transition to I earlier. In contrast, in cochlear implants, there's no separate coding of these individual harmonics. We may be sending fluctuations at the rate of 100 Hz into electrodes which innervate bits of the basal membrane, which will normally respond to much faster rates. So, suppose we want to reintroduce normal pitch perception in cochlear implants. How could we possibly do that? Well, we need to somehow get phase lock into these individual resolved harmonics, because we might also want this phase rate match in this phase position. We'd also need to selectively stimulate different sites for each node of the nerve range for each node of the harmonic. Get each electrode in the correct place, and perhaps introduce this phase transition. And having done that, what we have to do is to get periodicity information or temporal information down the auditory nerve at a high rate in a way to your central auditory system can be. And what I should say is that all of the attempts which have been put forward so far to getting this fine structure information down the auditory nerve don't take any of this into account. Okay, so far, I've been talking about the pitch of single sounds in cochlear implants. If we think about simultaneous sounds, I'm going to further subdivide that down into two different ways in which implant users might possibly be able to do the task. This way, which I've already shown you, where you've got two different pulse rates within a single channel, I've already said remotely hearing listeners can't do this using acoustic pulse trains, and in-part listeners can't do Carlyon. But how about a simple situation where you've got two formants of one voice, of one pitch, this red one here, and two formants of another voice, and the different Schneider's formants don't overlap. So theoretically, in each channel, you might get one repetition rate in electrodes responding to this formant, another rate to this one. So we use these simplified pulse trains to have a look at that. So here's 4 electrodes, 3 of them go one rate, and this one, highlighted in yellow, is going along with a slower rate. There were quite a lot of conditions on this experiment, but you'll be pleased to hear I only want to be about 2 of them. This is actually the penultimate experiment. So in our baseline condition, what we did was present subjects with 2 pairs of sounds. This one and this one, each of which consists of a single electrode stimulus, which I'll call probe, and then a mixture. One of these electrodes in the mixture had a higher level than the others, a bit higher if you like. And what subjects had to do was to say in which of these 2 intervals did this probe correspond to this target component of the mixture. So here, the correct answer is this sound. In this case, the correct answer would be sound 2. And in this baseline condition, all of these electrodes are stimulated at a rate of 100 pulses per second. What we then do is to allow this target channel, target electrode, to have a different rate from the other, so a slower rate, 77 pulses per second. And the question is, can subjects use that? And the answer is no. If you look at the percent correct on this task, here's your baseline condition, here's the normal rate difference. Sometimes it makes you a little bit better, but equally as likely it makes you worse. So now what about onset differences? I've spent most of this lecture banging on about why it is that pitch differences are processed separately in concurrent parts of the normal differences. But onset differences aren't any good, processed any differently. Essentially, you turn the sound on, the nerve starts firing, the memory starts vibrating, you stimulate the electrode, and it just starts. So now what we're going to do is to just see whether, do exactly the same experiment, here's our baseline condition. And now what I'm going to do is to introduce an onset difference. Now this onset difference here is 200 milliseconds, which in many normally hearing experiments would just be dead easy. So what happens when we do this is we find that there is an improvement in performance. Here's our baseline condition, here's our onset difference condition. And performance is improved substantially, but actually not by very much. So this game is something of a puzzle because it's a big concept. Onset differences are like the king of grouping keys in normal. Yet we find that not really very much is happening. Something's happening a bit. So what we did was perform some simulations of this situation with normally hearing listeners. This really is the last experiment. Well, it turns out that most of the experiments which show the importance of the onset key, usually, for example, do things like turn on one component of the complex slightly later than the other, and these are usually resolved harmonics, which each excite separate subsets of auditory nerve harmonics. But in the concurrent part, if you stimulate one electrode, then it will, its current will spread along the electrode array to other electrodes. So this may be why they get a substantial improvement in performance. So, how is it then that we might finally improve cocktail parties for copyright? If we want to reproduce normal pitch processing, as I said, we might need to selectively encode individual harmonics and subsets of auditory nerve harmonics. We might need to reintroduce these phase transitions. If we want to add this so-called fine structure information, it's not really going to help unless we can reduce this current spread between channels, which causes the excitation to overlap. And even if we want the implant users to use differences in onset time between different channels, that cue has been used very efficiently unless we can reduce the overlap between the different channels. So how do we do this? There is one new approach out there which I think stands a cat's chance in hell, if I like to say that, of working. And I would say it's a long shot, but it's a medium shot. And it's, I think, the best game in town. So, the engineers amongst you, I think, will find this quite neat. A chap called Chris Van der Hoven, who's a famous physiologist who now works for one of the implant companies, has developed an experimental implant in which essentially there's a plug which sticks to the patient's skin. They typically wear this for 6 months. These are actually patients who can't afford it. They get really things for 6 months. They don't real one afterwards. There's a plug which sticks through the skin. And it's got 22 connectors, one for each electrode inside the implant. And there are 3 bands connected here. One of them goes to this, this is the electrode array, which I showed you earlier, curving around inside the cochlea. And this is one of the return electrodes, more outside the cochlea. And there's another return electrode also, which is not shown, which comes out from the blood streams. So what he says is, well, suppose what we want to do is to produce excitation at one bit of the cochlea, say one electrode side, one electrode only. How would I go about that? So what he does is he measures the impedance between each electrode and every other electrode. So he puts in a voltage at each electrode, assumes that these stimulation rates are purely resistive there, and measures the voltage at each of the other electrodes, and gets a matrix. He then derives the inverse solution, which allows him to say which combination of currents and phases would you need in all these different electrodes to get this particular type of stimulation at this place. So he's got a paper submitted to a well-known journal which details how he proposes to build that. So there's some limitations to this. You know, it's a great device, but it runs off only 3-car batteries. And obviously it's still experimental. But what we're doing in collaboration, back starting in collaboration with Chris Van der Hoven, is to use experiments very similar to the last ones I've described, where subjects have to, for example, detect which of 4 electrodes is what the onset will emit. Use that for sound segregation to see whether performance really can be improved by producing more sound patterns with excitation on the electrode. So I'll be glad to come back 5 years' time with another demonstration of this and work. Alright, it's obvious that it can. Okay, so here's my summary. Electric and acoustic cocktail. Listening to the cocktail party, or in the House of Commons in England, presents the auditory system with a very challenging single processing task. Normally hearing listeners exploit onset cues and pitch differences between sounds to perform this task amazingly well, even with one ear. I would give you another lecture on how implant listeners are normally hearing lessons with 2 of those or both of these. I don't know. Normally hearing listeners, when you implant listeners, don't extract different temporal patterns within a single channel, a single frequency channel, or a single set of notifiers. And they don't use this common thing that differences in frequency between sounds. Pitch is encoded very differently depending on what we're hearing, and these differences limit pitch perception and sound segregation. Onset cues, the other big cue, are encoded similarly in the 2 types of hearing, but in cochlear implant hearing, they're probably limited by this lack of selectivity due to this current state between channels. And finding new methods of improving the selectivity may allow us to explore the knowledge of pitch processing to actually reproduce something approaching the correct types of decodable information in the cochlear implant and may improve sound segregation by implant listeners. And I think it's this last approach which I think is the most fruitful for the future of cochlear implants. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. So we have some time for we have a gift from ISR.
Yeah.
It's a pointer because we noticed you were having a hard time finding it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
That's because I have so now.
So, any questions or? Oh, yes.
Science fiction.
Uh-huh.
Suppose we knew nothing whatsoever about hearing.
Yeah.
But we really understood the tricolor theory of vision, vision very, very well.
Mm-hmm.
Recognized with basically three types of receptors.
Yeah.
We distinguish the whole range.
Absolutely.
They sort out the range by color very effectively.
Yeah.
But suppose we wanted to try to do hearing research for the first time. If we had past filters, we might want to look at something rather that corresponds to color, possibly vowels.
Yeah.
I don't know what this sort of thing is even up to any sense at all.
No. What has been done is that what you can do is produce intermediate patterns of stimulation. So you can have two electrodes stimulated, then rather than increase the number of electrodes, what you can do is to share the current between the adjacent electrodes and produce intermediate pitches. And you can even share the current between two electrodes at opposite ends of the cochlear. By producing, yeah, you can sort of produce.
Your shape, yes.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Well, the point I'm getting at is that it just could be that the band pass filters are not really the kind of filters we need. There might be filters which are what we call hollow pass filters, the typical fundamentals.
Well, I think we know the geometry system is, because it has got backpass filters, that it's designed for exploiting that type of information, or to exploit information which is decoded peripherally in that sort of way. What is true is that the filter banks which I showed you were linear, and we know that in real life the filter banks are highly nonlinear. So one thing which one might have to do is to reproduce the nonlinearity in the filter bank. So that's the microphone. I'm sorry? Is the nonlinearity?
Helping with the isolation.
Yes, it is.
It seems to separate from the glass as a living program array.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So, as well as receptor cells in the as a memory, there are neural cells, neural hair cells, which vibrate in response to sound, and they push energy back into the system. They do so most at low levels, and also for tones which are at their best frequency. So our frequency tones don't get amplified. On frequency tones really don't. That's right. It produces this amplification.
So this idea that she had to push 20-something years ago,
Yeah.
phase transition is very interesting.
Yeah.
And it seems like that's one major thing that's missing, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
So with this new phase, this is more common.
Yeah.
With this new phase array electrode, you're talking about being able to stimulate one place.
Yeah.
But it seems that the next step up would be able to stimulate one place at one time.
Yeah.
And the next place is slightly different.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so, is that the idea that ultimately it wouldn't be just one place, but you could have an electrode array with million electrodes and a very complicated phase array?
I guess you might get a medium electrodes or more electrodes, yeah. You may be able to introduce these timing differences even with the number of electrodes you have done.
Okay.
It's kind of on that more level, I might be able to do that.
So you're thinking about looking at creating
I am,
this
yes.
phase array.
If you think about it, the cochlear itself is like a copper wire conductor. And so it's really hard to figure out a way to separate these electrodes from each other. It's stimulating a wire in different places. So the overlap.
Yeah.
But they don't agree.
Well, there's a huge shunt down the length of the cochlear.
That's why.
Yeah, you can get away, that's right.
Yeah.
There is luckily some difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
That would be really amazing.
Yeah, I think all these people says, oh, the maths is trivial, right? It's trivial to you. Oh, there's a perceptive experiment. Is the conductivity time rate?
Easy to find.
Yeah.
They feel it.
Yeah.
Is that time variable?
At present, it's only measured it for, it hasn't measured it in a different kind of place. So, I think it's assuming it's purely existing system.
How many of the so-called electrical ideas go?
The so-called electrical ideas, probably not. No.
Electrical ideas go.
I might need to come in with the concept that it was described.
The problem is you have a block
Yeah.
of resistance.
Yeah.
And allowed to make measurements for granted
Yeah.
of either currents or voltages.
Yeah.
And trying to get the exact map of what's going on.
Yeah.
That problem is pretty solved. That we can actually solve a particular rate, particular rate. So, okay, that's what we're doing is to set the base of the problem because it's trying to use the data in such a way so that it gets everything at zero and it gets everything.
Yeah. So have you shown essentially that one can, one can do that with this? We try to do this in other courts.
So they tried it.
Sorry?
They tried it.
They've tried it in people, they've done a number of experiments with this permutating income. They've tried this sharpening with people, but basically used the task which you thought was corrupted by language cues. Because it's quite hard to match your own simile things. So there was a meeting in Massachusetts, which you were far from due to the long-term chromosome, I think. There was a meeting where everyone here was alone. No one was up there. So I called it the dead white man's meeting because I was probably the youngest. Yeah, absolutely. I didn't actually happen because he's too right. But anyway, so at this meeting, he told me about numbers and said that, well, unfortunately, you didn't really have an appropriate psychoacoustical task. And then I said, well, I have. And so we're planning to do essentially that experiment with the phase race. So we're going to compare really sharp patterns of simulation and just what you get with broad patterns and what kind of simulation.
If you were successful provider, can you by simulation model prove that you produce more theoretic
Well, what I'm in the process of doing is designing experiments to show that, for example, we test this space as
you
you
know the interest in finding what level of isolation you need.
Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting like that level is
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're looking at now is to show the principle that are making these work.
I'll take a couple of questions on that, and then review it and
So, quick question. Usually, when you listen to sounds, especially loud sounds, you activate almost all of the verifiers.
Yeah.
So it's not just thread that's a problem. It's something about the precision that can extract it from some higher levels.
Yeah.
So it's a sort of twofold question. John Middlebrooks has been pushing the idea of using stimulation in the auditory nerve as opposed to sort of crooked. As a way of increasing precision. You had a good way to stimulate individual fibers. That might have precision.
Yeah.
But just thinking about it from a technical standpoint, what other possibilities are there to have that combination where you both put amplitude, presumably we're recruiting our fibers if they do the same way that the ear does it, but also giving precision.
So I think, there is this issue. If you were to just stimulate one place on the one pinpoint place in the cockpit, it's actually quite hard to get the stimulation around it to for it to reach a comfortable level. And one of the problems with previous approaches is that what they typically do is to yank the current level up so that it's loud enough. Using something which they think should produce focus stimulation. But by the time they yank the current up so it's loud enough, it's recruiting lots of other auditory nerve patterns. So I think what we need is a scheme essentially where when you're stimulating one channel only, then you actually may allow a fairly broad spread of excitation. And then when you have multiple channels selected, you get the sharper activation. So it's going to take a single processing. I can make some kind of hand waving suggestions, but it's going to take a single processing engineer to implement sort of strategy which allows you to do that, to sharpen things up as you have more patterns. That's really the sort of thing we're going to have to do when we're going to do it. Yeah.
And so what do we go, so what, one after another, all 22.
Yeah.
What sort of pitch sensation does the CI person get?
They, as you move more basally, they say that you get towards more high frequency regions of the ear, then you get a higher pitch, so like a sharper camera. So really there are two ways of encoding pitch, one temporally and one in terms of place. But there's no, what you couldn't know in subjects, there's no evidence that subjects could, not very good evidence that you could have two places on that membrane which corresponded to say an octave difference or a musical frequency or something like that. Whereas we do know that if you heard in a concert, then musically trained subjects can identify or even produce.
Well, that brings us to the 30-year question. You feel that not correctly is known about what the hair cells actually are doing. To make it possible to synthesize.
No, I think it's pretty well. I'm speaking from a point of sort of unsliding routes. I think the operation of the hair cells is pretty much the hair cell biologists want to say is the more rats around the world. But I don't think that's maybe a major blockage of our knowledge. Because we know what's happening in the auditory nerve.
If we take what question directly here.
Getting hungry.
I was wondering, has anybody looked at, do normal hearing people have a way of emphasizing noise if they want to, like they don't want to pay attention to the person in front of them, like they're wearing noses and crosses in the back, and is that possible?
Yeah. So having two ears helps quite a lot, because if you've got a boring person on your right and an interesting person on your left, then you can then decide which ear to listen to. And there are other binaural cues which you use to separate voices. Yeah, there is this problem, which is that if you wanted to have sort of sound cancellation in the cochlear implant, like an automatic problem, you're always going to be a bit stuck, because the algorithm doesn't know which bit the person wants to listen to and which bit they don't. Whereas in the way the normal imaging system does is it allows both sets of information to be separately available for selective attention. So having two cochlear implants, for example, is one of the few ways in which you can get that kind of genuine sound segregation advantage. You get an extra channel of information.
Those who have more questions, I volunteer that Bob will be here for a while. Thank you so much, Bob.
I have the pleasure of